Life has a way of bringing us full circle, of reminding us where we came from, even when we've reached the heights of success. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina, Michael Jordan wasn't thinking about his 6 NBA championships or his billion-dollar empire. He was thinking about lunch. The bustling shopping center was just like any other, filled with the usual mix of hurried shoppers and casual window browsers. Michael had chosen this particular afternoon to visit, hoping the midweek timing would mean fewer people would recognize him. Even after all these years, he still appreciated moments of normalcy, chances to just be himself without the weight of his legacy following his every step. Walking past the fountain at the center of the mall, Michael noticed how the sunlight caught the falling water, creating tiny rainbows that danced on the polished floor. It reminded him of his childhood days in Wilmington, where he'd spend hours watching similar patterns in his backyard sprinkler. Those were simpler times, when his biggest worry was making it home before dark and finishing his homework before watching TV. But fate had other plans for this ordinary Tuesday. As Michael approached the food court, something caught his eye, or rather, someone. In the sea of faces, one stood out, bringing with it a flood of memories from over 4 decades ago. There, sitting quietly in a wheelchair near the Chinese restaurant, was Mrs. Patricia Barnett. Time had painted silver through her hair, and age had softened her once strict posture, but Michael would have recognized those kind eyes anywhere. They were the same eyes that had looked at him with patience and understanding when he struggled with fractions in 5th grade, the same eyes that had seen potential in a young boy who couldn't sit still during reading time. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, transported back to room 23 of Wilson Grove Elementary School. He could almost smell the chalk dust and feel the scratch of pencil on paper. Mrs. Barnett had been more than just a teacher. She had been a beacon of encouragement during a time when he was just beginning to dream of what he might become. The memories washed over him like waves. Her staying after school to help him with his multiplication tables, the way she'd write, "I believe in you," on his test papers even when the grades weren't perfect, how she'd let him shoot paper balls into the wastebasket if he finished his work early, perhaps the first audience to witness what would become his legendary accuracy. As he watched her now, sitting alone with a small cup of tea in front of her, Michael noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cup to her lips. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone who had learned to navigate the world in a new way. The wheelchair was a stark reminder of how much time had passed, how life had continued its relentless march forward. A young woman, later Michael would learn this was Mrs. Barnett's granddaughter, Sarah, stood nearby, checking her phone while keeping a watchful eye on her grandmother. They seemed to be waiting for someone, perhaps another family member, to join them for lunch. Michael felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Here was the woman who had helped shape his early years, who had been one of the first people outside his family to tell him he could be anything he wanted to be. And now, seeing her in this vulnerable state, he realized how rarely we get the chance to thank the people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. He thought about walking over immediately, but something held him back. It wasn't hesitation. Michael Jordan had never been one to hesitate, but rather a desire to do this right. This wasn't just any encounter. This was a chance to repay a debt of kindness that had been accumulating interest for over 40 years. Pulling out his phone, Michael made a quick call to his assistant. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it properly. As he spoke quietly into the phone, his eyes never left Mrs. Barnett's table. He watched as she smiled at something her granddaughter said, that same warm smile that had encouraged countless students over her teaching career. While waiting for his plan to come together, Michael observed the scene around them. The food court was starting to fill up with the early lunch crowd. A businessman in a rushed suit nearly knocked over his coffee as he juggled his phone and briefcase. A mother tried to quiet her crying toddler while simultaneously attempting to eat her salad. Life was happening all around them, but in that moment, Michael was transported back to a time when the world was simpler, when the future was still an unwritten page. He remembered the day Mrs. Barnett had caught him drawing basketball plays instead of paying attention to her lesson about the American Revolution. Instead of scolding him, she had used it as an opportunity. "Michael," she had said, "if you can show me how these plays relate to the strategies the Continental Army used, you can keep drawing." It was the first time someone had shown him that his passion for basketball could connect to everything else in life. As his assistant confirmed that everything was arranged, Michael took a deep breath. He thought about all the teachers who shape young lives every day, never knowing which of their students might go on to change the world. Mrs. Barnett hadn't just taught him reading and arithmetic, she had taught him that discipline and dedication could turn any dream into reality. Walking toward her table, Michael felt his heart rate quicken slightly, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his final championship game. This wasn't about being Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. This was about being Michael, the former student who had never forgotten the teacher who made a difference. Mrs. Barnett didn't notice him at first, focused on stirring her tea with slow, methodical movements. Her granddaughter's eyes widened in recognition, but before she could say anything, Michael gently placed his hand on the older woman's shoulder. "Mrs. Barnett?" His voice was soft, respectful. "I believe you used to have a student who couldn't quite sit still during story time." The moment she looked up, time seemed to stand still. Her eyes, though older now, still held that sharp intelligence that had kept a classroom of energetic fifth graders in line. For a split second, there was confusion, then disbelief, and finally, recognition. "Michael!" Her voice quivered slightly. "My goodness! Michael Jordan?" The way she said his name, not as the world knew him, but as she had known him, the young boy with endless energy and dreams bigger than his small town could contain, brought an unexpected lump to his throat. "Yes, ma'am," he smiled, kneeling down beside her wheelchair so they were at eye level. "I hope I'm not interrupting your lunch, but I couldn't walk by without saying hello to the teacher who taught me that even paper basketball could have educational value." Mrs. Barnett laughed, a sound that carried decades of memories. "Oh, those paper basketballs. I had to empty the wastebasket twice as often when you were in my class." Her eyes grew misty. "But you always did your work first, always kept your promise." As they talked, the busy food court seemed to fade away. Michael noticed how Mrs. Barnett's hands still bore the slight calluses from years of gripping chalk and marking papers. She had taught for 35 years before retiring, touching countless young lives with her unique blend of discipline and encouragement. "I never got to thank you properly," Michael said, his voice carrying the weight of years of gratitude. "For believing in me when I was just a kid who couldn't stop moving, for showing me that learning could be fun, for teaching me that discipline was just as important as talent." Mrs. Barnett's eyes welled with tears, but her smile remained bright. "Oh, Michael, you thanked me every time you succeeded, every time you showed the world what determination and hard work could achieve. I watched every game I could, and every time I saw you fly through the air, I remembered that little boy who used to jump up to reach the top of the chalkboard." The conversation flowed naturally, as if the decades between them were merely pages in a book they could flip through together. They talked about old classmates, about the school plays she had directed, about the time Michael had convinced the entire class to do their book reports as sports commentaries. But as they spoke, Michael couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in her hands, the way she occasionally winced when shifting in her wheelchair. His quiet questions about her health revealed a story of mounting medical bills and the challenges of living on a teacher's pension. That's when Michael knew that this chance encounter wasn't just about reminiscing, it was about something more. It was about showing that the lessons she had taught about kindness, about giving back, about lifting others up, had taken root and grown into something beautiful. As his assistant approached with an envelope, Michael thought about all the accolades he had received in his life, the championships, the MVP awards, the Hall of Fame induction. But none of them felt quite as meaningful as what he was about to do for the woman who had helped set him on his path to greatness. The food court continued its lunchtime bustle around them, unaware that they were witnessing more than just a reunion between a teacher and her former student. They were witnessing the completion of a circle, the return of kindness given freely decades ago, now ready to be returned with interest. Michael Jordan had changed the game of basketball forever, but in that moment he was about to change one person's life forever. The person who had helped him believe he could change anything at all. The envelope in Michael's assistant's hand represented more than just financial assistance. It was a testament to the ripple effect of kindness, how a single person's belief in someone's potential could echo through decades and transform countless lives. As he took the envelope, Michael remembered something Mrs. Barnett had written in his 5th grade. Yearbook, your greatest achievements won't be measured by points scored, but by lives touched. Sarah, Mrs. Barnett's granddaughter, watched with curiosity as Michael pulled his chair closer to her grandmother's wheelchair. The food court's fluorescent lights cast a gentle glow over their small table, creating an intimate space within the bustling marketplace. A few onlookers had begun to notice who was sitting there, but they kept their respectful distance, sensing the significance of the moment. Mrs. Barnett, Michael began, his voice carrying the weight of years of success and gratitude. Do you remember when you caught me counting basketball stats instead of doing my mathematics homework? He smiled at the memory, his hands gently folding the envelope's corners. The elderly teacher's eyes sparkled with recognition. Of course. That's when we created the Jordan method of learning multiplication tables using shooting percentages. She laughed softly, the sound carrying across their small table. You never missed another math test after that. Michael nodded, his expression growing more serious. You didn't just teach me math that day. You taught me that success comes from adapting, from finding ways to connect what you love with what you need to learn. He paused, looking down at the envelope in his hands. You showed me that every challenge could be turned into an opportunity. Mrs. Barnett's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. Sarah quickly steadied it for her, and Michael noticed the worn medical alert bracelet on Mrs. Barnett's wrist, a silent reminder of her current struggles. The sight strengthened his resolve about what he was about to do. I've been blessed with success beyond anything I could have imagined when I was sitting in your classroom, Michael continued, his voice growing softer. But success means nothing if we don't use it to lift up the people who helped us achieve it. He glanced at Sarah, who had tears forming in her eyes, before turning back to his former teacher. I had my team do some research when I first saw you today. I know about the medical bills, the challenges with the insurance company, the modifications your house needs. He held up his hand gently when Mrs. Barnett began to protest. Please, let me finish. The noise of the food court seemed to fade away as Michael opened the envelope. This isn't charity, Mrs. Barnett. This is an investment. The same kind of investment you made in me and countless other students over your 35 years of teaching. You invested your time, your patience, your belief in our potential. Now it's my turn to invest in your comfort and well-being. Inside the envelope was a check that would cover all of Mrs. Barnett's medical expenses, home modifications, and provide for her care for years to come. But that wasn't all. Michael pulled out a second piece of paper, a document establishing the Patricia Barnett Education Fund, a foundation that would provide scholarships to aspiring teachers and support programs for innovative classroom instruction. You see, Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion, your impact doesn't end with me. Every student you encouraged, every child you helped believe in themselves, they're all part of your legacy. And now, through this foundation, that legacy will continue to grow. Mrs. Barnett's hands shook as she took the papers, her eyes widening as she processed what she was seeing. Sarah leaned over her grandmother's shoulder, gasping as she saw the figures on the check. The young woman looked at Michael with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Michael, I don't know what to say, Mrs. Barnett whispered, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. This is too much. No, Mrs. Barnett, it's not enough. Michael leaned forward, taking her hand in his. How do you repay someone who taught you that your worth isn't measured by your achievements, but by your character? How do you thank the person who showed you that education isn't just about books and tests, but about discovering who you are and what you can become? The moment was interrupted by a small commotion nearby. A young boy, no more than 10 years old, had dropped his tray of food, sending French fries scattering across the floor. Without hesitation, Mrs. Barnett wheeled herself toward him, her teacher's instincts still sharp after all these years. It's all right, dear, she called out to the embarrassed child. Accidents happen to everyone. What matters is how we handle them. She smiled warmly at the boy, who had begun to pick up the scattered food with his mother's help. Michael watched the scene unfold, a profound realization washing over him. Even now, confined to a wheelchair and dealing with her own challenges, Mrs. Barnett's first instinct was to teach, to comfort, to make a difference in someone's life. It was who she was at her core, a teacher, a mentor, a guiding light. Standing up, Michael moved to help clean up the spill, joining Mrs. Barnett in her small act of kindness. As they worked together, just as they had done decades ago in that elementary school classroom, he saw the same principles she had taught him in action, dignity in all situations, helping others without hesitation, turning moments of difficulty into opportunities for growth. The boy's mother recognized Michael, her eyes widening in surprise, but before she could say anything, he pressed a finger to his lips with a gentle smile. This moment wasn't about him being Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. It was about honoring the legacy of a teacher who had shaped not just his future, but his character. As they returned to their table, Michael noticed how Mrs. Barnett's posture had straightened, how her eyes shone with renewed purpose. The check and the foundation were important, yes, but perhaps the greatest gift was the recognition of her lasting impact, the acknowledgement that her life's work had helped shape generations of students. "You know," Michael said, settling back into his chair, "I've been thinking about something you used to say in class. Remember your favorite quote? Education is not filling a bucket, but lighting a fire." Mrs. Barnett smiled broadly. "Yeats," she nodded. "You remembered." "I remembered everything, Mrs. Barnett. The way you'd start each day with a riddle to get our minds working. How you'd let us earn extra credit by teaching something to the class. The time you spent your own money on new books for the reading corner." He paused, looking around the food court. "Every success I've had, every challenge I've overcome, I've used the lessons you taught us. Not just the academic ones, but the life lessons." Sarah, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Grandmother, you never told me about teaching Michael Jordan. All these years, you've never mentioned it." Mrs. Barnett patted her granddaughter's hand. "Dear, every student was special to me. Michael was no different then. He was just a boy with dreams, like all the others. That's what teaching is about, seeing the potential in every child, not just the ones who become famous." Her words hit Michael hard. Here was the essence of true teaching, the ability to see greatness in every student, to nurture potential wherever it was found. He thought about all the teachers across the country doing the same thing right now, working with limited resources but unlimited dedication. "That's why the foundation is so important," Michael explained, pulling out additional documents from his jacket. "It's not just about helping you, Mrs. Barnett. It's about helping other teachers create the kind of magical learning environment you created for us. It's about supporting educators who go above and beyond, who see teaching not as a job, but as a calling." As he outlined the details of the foundation, the annual scholarships, the classroom innovation grants, the professional development programs, Michael could see Mrs. Barnett's educator mind working, already thinking about how these resources could help shape future generations of teachers and students. The foundation would be her legacy, ensuring that her approach to education, one that combined academic excellence with character development, that saw each student as an individual with unique potential, would continue to influence classrooms long into the future. "There's one more thing," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn piece of paper, a fifth-grade report card with Mrs. Barnett's distinctive handwriting on it. "I've kept this all these years. Your note at the bottom says, 'Michael has the potential to soar, not just on the basketball court, but in life. His determination and character will take him far.'" Mrs. Barnett's eyes filled with tears again as she saw her own handwriting from so many years ago. "You kept that all this time?" "It's been in my wallet since the day you gave it to me," Michael admitted. "Through every game, every victory, every defeat. It reminded me that someone believed in me before the world did. Someone saw more in me than just athletic ability." The food court had grown quieter, as if the universe itself was paying respect to this moment of connection between a legendary athlete and the teacher who had helped shape his character. The afternoon sun streaming through the skylights cast a warm glow over their table, highlighting the tears of joy and gratitude that flowed freely between them. In that moment, Michael Jordan wasn't thinking about his next business meeting, his upcoming appearances, or his various enterprises. He was thinking about a classroom from long ago, where a dedicated teacher had shown him that the path to greatness wasn't just about natural talent, it was about character, dedication, and the willingness to lift others as you climbed. As word of Michael's presence in the food court began to spread, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. Among them was Thomas Reeves, a current elementary school teacher who had stopped for lunch during his break. He watched the interaction between the basketball legend and the elderly teacher with growing interest, his own brown bag lunch forgotten on the table beside him. Michael noticed the gathering crowd but remained focused on Mrs. Barnett. He had learned long ago that true moments of significance often happened in the quiet spaces between grand gestures. Right now, watching his former teacher examine the foundation documents with careful attention, he saw something remarkable happening: the rekindling of a passionate educator's spirit. "You know, Michael," Mrs. Barnett said, looking up from the papers, "this foundation could do more than just provide financial support." Her voice had taken on the familiar tone he remembered from classroom discussions, the one that always preceded an innovative idea. "We could create mentorship programs, connecting experienced teachers with new ones, just like you're doing with me today, coming back to acknowledge the impact of education." Sarah, who had been quietly observing, pulled out her phone and started taking notes. Her grandmother's enthusiasm was infectious, and Michael could see the same spark of dedication that had inspired him all those years ago now lighting up the faces of both women. "Tell me more," Michael encouraged, leaning forward. This was the Mrs. Barnett he remembered, the one who could turn any moment into an opportunity for growth and learning. "Well," she began, her hands gesturing expressively despite their tremor, "imagine a program where successful people from all walks of life return to thank their teachers, not just with resources, but with their presence and their stories. It could show current teachers that their impact extends far beyond their classroom walls, and it could show students that success has many faces." Michael nodded thoughtfully, already seeing the potential. He gestured to his assistant, who quickly approached with a notebook. "This is exactly why I wanted to create this foundation in your name, Mrs. Barnett. You've never stopped teaching, never stopped seeing possibilities." The conversation was interrupted by a small voice from nearby. "Excuse me?" A young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, stood nervously at the edge of their table. Her mother, looking embarrassed, tried to pull her back, but Michael waved them forward with a warm smile. "It's okay," he said, noting how the girl clutched a worn notebook to her chest, much like he used to do with his basketball playbook in Mrs. Barnett's class. The girl looked at Mrs. Barnett first, then at Michael. "I heard you talking about teachers and making a difference," she said softly. "My teacher, Ms. Reynolds, she's like that too. She stays after school to help us with homework because some of us don't have computers at home. She even bought art supplies with her own money so we could have an art club." Mrs. Barnett's eyes welled up with tears as she reached out to take the girl's hand. "What's your name, dear?" "Angela Carter," the girl replied, gaining confidence. "I want to be a teacher too, just like Ms. Reynolds. But my mom says it's hard to make a living as a teacher." She glanced at her mother, who looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her daughter's candor. Michael exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Barnett before turning to Angela. "You know, when I was your age, sitting in Mrs. Barnett's class, she taught me something important. She said that the richest people aren't always the ones with the most money, they're the ones who make the biggest difference in others' lives." He reached for the foundation documents, quickly writing something on a blank page. "Angela, I want you to be the first recipient of the Patricia Barnett Future Educator Scholarship. When you're ready for college, this foundation will help you achieve your dream of becoming a teacher." The girl's mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Angela stood frozen, her notebook slipping slightly in her grip. Mrs. Barnett beamed with pride, reaching out to squeeze Michael's hand in gratitude. "But that's not all," Michael continued, his voice carrying the same intensity it had in crucial game moments. "I want you to help us with something important right now. Would you be willing to share your story about Ms. Reynolds? About why you want to become a teacher?" Angela nodded eagerly, her earlier shyness forgotten in the excitement of the moment. As she spoke about her teacher's dedication, about the after-school programs and the difference they made in students' lives, Michael's assistant recorded everything. This would become the first of many stories collected by the Patricia Barnett Foundation, real testimonies about the impact of dedicated teachers. Thomas Reeves, The teacher, who had been watching from nearby, finally found the courage to approach. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "but this conversation, it's exactly what we need in education right now. So many of my colleagues are losing heart, feeling unappreciated, wondering if they're making a difference." Mrs. Barnett turned her wheelchair to face him fully. "You're a teacher?" she asked, though she had already recognized the look, that mixture of passion and exhaustion that all dedicated educators shared. "Yes, ma'am. 5th grade, just like you were," he replied. And hearing this conversation, seeing this moment, it reminds me why we do what we do. Michael stood up, extending his hand to Thomas. "Then you should be part of this too. The foundation needs voices like yours, teachers who are in the classroom right now, facing today's challenges." As they talked, more people began sharing their own stories of teachers who had changed their lives. A businessman stepped forward to talk about the English teacher who had helped him overcome his speech impediment. A nurse spoke about the science teacher who had believed in her when everyone else said she wasn't cut out for medical studies. The food court had transformed into an impromptu gathering of gratitude and remembrance. Mrs. Barnett sat at the center of it all, her eyes shining with joy as she witnessed the cascade of appreciation for educators, a validation not just of her own career, but of every teacher who had ever touched a student's life. Sarah, who had been recording portions of the conversation on her phone, turned to her grandmother with tears in her eyes. "I had no idea, Grandma. All these years, you never talked about the lives you touched, the differences you made." Mrs. Barnett smiled softly. "Dear, teaching isn't about recognition. It's about planting seeds that may bloom long after we're gone. Michael here," she patted his hand affectionately, "he's just one of thousands of seeds I hoped would grow into something beautiful." Michael cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overcome him. "But Mrs. Barnett, that's exactly why we need to tell these stories. Teachers need to know that their work matters, that the seeds they plant do grow, that their impact extends far beyond their classroom walls." He turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the same authority it had during locker room speeches. "Every one of us has a Mrs. Barnett in our lives, a teacher who saw something in us that we couldn't see in ourselves. It's time we let them know what their dedication meant to us." Angela, still clutching her notebook, spoke up again. "Could we make videos? Like, telling our teachers stories? My brother makes YouTube videos. He says that's how people share important things now." Michael's face lit up with inspiration. "That's brilliant, Angela. We'll create a platform through the foundation where people can share their teacher appreciation stories. We'll call it Thank You Teacher, a place where everyone can acknowledge the educators who changed their lives." Mrs. Barnett watched as the idea took shape, her teacher's mind already seeing the educational possibilities. "And we could use these stories in schools," she added, "to show students that their teachers are investing in their futures, just like my teachers invested in mine." The afternoon light had begun to shift, casting long shadows across the food court floor, but no one seemed eager to leave. This chance encounter had sparked something powerful, a movement of gratitude and recognition that promised to extend far beyond this one moment. Thomas Reeves had pulled out his own phone and was already drafting an email to his principal, outlining ideas for implementing the Foundation's programs in their school. Angela and her mother were talking with Sarah about starting a student-led video project to document teacher appreciation stories. Michael watched it all unfold with a sense of profound satisfaction. What had started as a simple desire to help his former teacher had transformed into something much larger, a catalyst for changing how society valued and supported educators. "Mrs. Barnett," he said softly, kneeling beside her wheelchair once again, "you always told us that education was about more than just learning facts and figures. You said it was about creating ripples that would spread out and touch other lives. Look at what's happening here. Your ripples are still spreading, still touching lives, still creating change." The elderly teacher reached out to cup Michael's cheek with her hand, a gesture so maternal it brought fresh tears to his eyes. "And you, my dear Michael, have become a ripple maker yourself. This foundation, these stories, this moment, you're teaching others the most important lesson of all, the power of gratitude and recognition." As the afternoon wore on, more stories were shared, more connections were made, and more plans were set in motion. The Patricia Barnett Foundation was no longer just a financial instrument. It had become a movement, a mission, a way to ensure that teachers everywhere would know their value and feel their impact. The evening sun cast a golden glow through the food court skylights as Michael prepared for one final gesture. What had begun as a chance encounter had evolved into something far more significant, a movement that would impact educators and students across the country. But there was still one more piece to complete the circle. "Mrs. Barnett," Michael said, pulling his chair closer to his former teacher, "there's something else I'd like to share with you." He motioned to his assistant, who approached with a sleek tablet. "Remember how you always said that every student has a story waiting to be told?" Mrs. Barnett nodded, her eyes curious as Michael pulled up a video on the screen. The footage was grainy, clearly from decades ago, showing a school assembly at Wilson Grove Elementary. There, in the center of the frame, stood a younger Mrs. Barnett, her dark hair not yet touched by silver, addressing a room full of students. "I've had my team working on digitizing old school records and videos," Michael explained. "This was from my 5th grade graduation ceremony. Watch what happens next." In the video, Mrs. Barnett was calling students to receive their certificates. A young Michael Jordan bounded onto the stage, all energy and long limbs. But instead of simply taking his certificate and leaving, he stopped and whispered something to Mrs. Barnett that made her smile broadly. "I remember that day," Mrs. Barnett said softly, reaching out to touch the screen. "You told me you were going to make me proud someday. That you were going to show everyone that what you learned in my class was just as important as what you could do on the basketball court." Sarah, who had been watching the video with tears in her eyes, turned to her grandmother. "You kept your promise, didn't you, Michael? You showed the world that character and education matter just as much as athletic ability." Michael nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I achieved, every record I broke, every championship I won, they all started with the foundation Mrs. Barnett helped build. Not just the academic foundation, but the character foundation. The understanding that true greatness isn't just about personal achievement, it's about lifting others up along the way." Thomas Reeves, who had remained nearby, spoke up. "That's what we try to teach our students every day. But sometimes it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle, competing with social media fame and instant gratification culture." "Then let's change that narrative," Michael said decisively. He turned to Angela, who was still clutching her notebook. "Angela, you mentioned your brother makes YouTube videos. What if we used the power of social media to tell a different kind of story? Not just about success, but about the people who help us achieve it." The young girl's eyes lit up. "We could start a challenge. Like those viral challenges, but instead of doing silly things, people could share stories about their favorite teachers and nominate others to do the same." Mrs. Barnett smiled at Angela's enthusiasm. "You see, Michael? The students still have so much to teach us. They understand how to spread messages in ways we never imagined." The idea began to take shape as others joined the conversation. Sarah suggested creating a dedicated platform where people could upload their teacher appreciation videos. Thomas offered to pilot the program in his school district. Even the food court staff, who had been discreetly listening while cleaning nearby tables, began sharing their own teacher stories. Michael's assistant was rapidly taking notes, but Mrs. Barnett noticed something else in the growing excitement. She saw the same spark of possibility that had driven her through 35 years of teaching. It was the recognition that education wasn't just about passing tests or memorizing facts. It was about creating connections that could transform lives. "You know what this reminds me of?" Mrs. Barnett said, her voice carrying the warmth of decades of classroom wisdom. "It reminds me of our classroom motto: every day is a chance to learn something new, and every person is a chance to learn something valuable." Michael smiled broadly. "I still have that motto written in my office, Mrs. Barnett. It's right next to my first NBA contract and my Hall of Fame induction certificate. Because without that foundation, without your guidance, none of those other achievements would have meant as much." As the evening deepened, Michael shared more plans for the foundation. It wouldn't just provide financial support for teachers and aspiring educators, It would create a network of mentorship and recognition that could help revitalize the teaching profession. "We're going to start with your story, Mrs. Barnett," Michael explained. "Not just my story about you, but the stories of all the students whose lives you touched. We'll document how one teacher's dedication can create a legacy that spans generations." Angela, who had been quietly writing in her notebook, suddenly spoke up. "Could we interview Mrs. Barnett's other students too? Like, make it a big surprise for her?" Michael exchanged glances with Sarah, who nodded enthusiastically. "Actually," Sarah said, "I might have a way to make that happen. Next month is grandmother's birthday, and we were planning a small celebration." "Not anymore," Michael interjected with a grin. "Now we're planning something much bigger. Something that will show the world what one dedicated teacher can achieve." Mrs. Barnett began to protest, but Michael held up his hand. "Remember what you always told us. Accepting recognition gracefully is just as important as giving it generously." "Well, it's time for you to practice what you preached, Mrs. Barnett." The elderly teacher laughed, a sound that carried both joy and nostalgia. "Using my own words against me, you always were a clever student, Michael." As they continued planning, more people approached to share their stories. A janitor spoke about the teacher who had helped him learn English. A teenager told them about the math teacher who had helped her overcome her fear of numbers. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of educational impact they were weaving. "This is more than just a foundation now," Michael reflected, watching the interactions around them. "This is a movement. A reminder that behind every success story, there's usually a teacher who believed, who encouraged, who inspired." Mrs. Barnett reached for Michael's hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her physical limitations. "And sometimes, those students go on to inspire others in ways we never could have imagined. That's the real magic of teaching. You never know how far your influence will reach." The food court had long since emptied of its regular customers, but their small group remained, bound together by the power of shared purpose and gratitude. Thomas was already making plans to implement teacher appreciation programs in his school. Angela and her mother were discussing ways to start a student-led video project. Sarah was coordinating with Michael's assistant about the upcoming birthday celebration. As the evening drew to a close, Michael had one final surprise. He pulled out a small box from his jacket pocket and handed it to Mrs. Barnett. Inside was a gold pendant, engraved with the classroom motto she had made famous. "This isn't just a piece of jewelry," Michael explained as he helped her fasten it around her neck. "It's the first of many. Every teacher who participates in the Foundation's programs will receive one, along with a reminder that their work matters, that their dedication is seen and appreciated." Mrs. Barnett touched the pendant gently, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Michael, when I saw you in that food court today, I thought I was just going to get to catch up with a former student. Instead, you've given all teachers, something priceless, validation that what we do matters, that our efforts create ripples we might never see." The security guards were starting to make their final rounds, signaling that it was time to leave. But before they parted ways, Michael had one more thing to say. He knelt beside Mrs. Barnett's wheelchair, taking both her hands in his. "Mrs. Barnett, you once told me that true success isn't measured by trophies or records, but by the lives we touch and the differences we make. Today, seeing you work your teaching magic again, with Angela, with Thomas, with everyone who shared their stories, I finally understand exactly what you meant." He stood up, addressing the small group that remained. "This is just the beginning. The Patricia Barnett Foundation isn't just going to provide financial support, it's going to change how society values teachers. It's going to remind everyone that behind every doctor, every athlete, every success story, there's a teacher who helped make it possible." As they prepared to leave, Angela rushed forward to give Mrs. Barnett a hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that being a teacher is the most important job in the world." Mrs. Barnett hugged her back, then looked up at Michael with pride shining in her eyes. "No, thank you all for showing me that a teacher's work is never really finished. It just keeps growing, touching more lives, creating more possibilities." The small group made their way out of the food court, their steps echoing in the near-empty mall. But they weren't just leaving a place, They were walking toward a future where teachers would be celebrated, supported, and recognized for the heroes they truly are. As Michael helped Mrs. Barnett into her car, she turned to him one last time. "You know, Michael, I always knew you would soar. But what makes me proudest isn't the heights you've reached, it's that you never forgot the ground where you started, or the people who helped you spread your wings." The car pulled away, carrying Mrs. Barnett and Sarah home, but Michael stood watching until its taillights disappeared into the night. He thought about all the teachers out there, working tirelessly to help their students achieve their dreams, never knowing if their efforts would bear fruit. Thanks to one chance encounter in a food court, many of them would soon know just how much their dedication meant. The Patricia Barnett Foundation would make sure of that, one story, one scholarship, one recognition at a time. As Michael walked to his own car, he smiled, remembering Mrs. Barnett's words from so long ago: "Education is not filling a bucket, but lighting a fire." Today, they had lit a fire that would warm and illuminate countless lives for generations to come.